Restream.io. Hello, people. If anyone is watching, apologies for the
Oh, the intro is the best
technical
part
chat.
when people are still trying to sort things out to make sure they're active. It's like a common staple of live streaming.
Okay, so here we go. Let's share this. This is Restream says we're streaming. It says these things are online.
Hey!
So don't know what this is about. Oh, I have the option to mute myself from here. That's kind of cool. So yeah, I mean, it says we're live on Facebook.
Perfect.
And such. I'm going to be careful about when I was live with my mom last week. I accidentally loaded Twitch at the same time as we were streaming, and we got this cool feedback loop.
Lovely.
It was actually
Was that like pictures within pictures thing, or?
it was the audio.
Okay.
There's like I wouldn't say 1 second delay.
Okay, because there was another point where you had like some video on the screen and it was like repeating it like when you point like a camera at the monitor that's outputting the camera, and you just get that window within a window within a window for infinity thing.
That's a good effect.
Yeah.
Well, so here's my streaming monitor. It says we are well, I'll show you this again.
You have a hello on Facebook.
Yay. Who's it from?
Oh, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It sounds French, like Guillaume or something like that.
Guillaume is watching.
Guillaume.
Hey, Guillaume.
Okay.
This is our first time attempting this, so it's gonna be a bit fumbly, shall we say? But it sounds like we're live on Facebook. I don't see us on Twitch, but what are we going to do?
Well, it says you're broadcasting on Twitch.
Yeah, let's go with that. Guillaume is from Facebook, so good morning, Guillaume. We're going to get started. As those of you out there may or may not know, I have been putting together a little series of Game Audio Pro videos about some issues that Game Audio Pros might face out there in the wild, and things that Game Audio Pros have and can do about those things. So this week I'm trying something a little bit different. I had a fun live stream with my mom last week for a charity event, and it went better than we expected, given that we'd done almost no prep. So I thought it would be fun to do something live again, and I liked the format of having a co-host, because then it's not just me talking. There's actually a little bit of a show and ask, and there's live monitoring of if I say anything stupid or unclear. A co-host can jump in and say, hey, that was stupid or unclear, and ask intelligent and clarifying questions. So I have with me today Toby Cox. Oh, I should have prepared a text with the spelling. I wonder if I can do that quickly. It might be beyond my means. It's pictured bottom right of your screens. Toby Cox, a longtime friend of mine. He is a great, intelligent question asker. He's also going to be... My mom popped up in chat saying she's here to say if anything is stupid or unclear. Excellent. Sorry, I was introducing Toby. A great question asker. He's also the relative math expert for this channel. Uh,
Oh no, I'm gonna have to do math.
no, but you've done grade 11 math, right?
I have, yes.
So I have not done grade 11 math, and you in fact have done, if I recall correctly, at least a couple years of college level math, shall we
Yeah,
say, for
I
the
I
U.S.
went to
watchers.
OAC actually in high school when there was actually 5 years, and took like calculus, and then I took a little bit of physics in university.
So, yeah, unfortunately, with game audio, sometimes a little bit of math is involved. Also, with just moving things around in Cartesian space. Um, so that should be good. The other thing I wanted to say quickly about Toby is he is an author. Whoosh! I'm gonna I'm gonna drag this. This might be a little bit weird, but just so Toby can see this as well. Toby doesn't get the same view as all of y'all at home, where you can see um,
Overlays?
the overlays. So this is what I'm sharing now, Toby. Toby wrote this book, Beyond the Contested Zone,
I
which
did.
is a great book. And do you want to say anything quickly about the book?
Yeah, it's a science fiction, but it kind of feels a little bit more like a fantasy because it doesn't have like high-tech laser guns and spaceships and stuff like that. Um, it's sort of like this first book anyway. It just follows a single character on an adventure. Has to have an adventure, of course. Currently writing a sequel for it, and I'm maybe about 25% through with the first draft of the sequel. So it's a little harder because there's more characters and more plot lines and things like that. The first one just kind of rolled onto the screen because it's just like a single person's point of view. A little bit easier to write that way. I'm having a spreadsheet plot lines for the second book to keep everything straight, which is kind of interesting.
I wanted to. It's easy to, very easy to drop this in the bucket of sort of science fiction slash sci-fi fantasy crossover.
Yeah,
But when I was reading it, I was just reading a novel. I Toby is very good at. Well, I'll speak for me. He was very good at like just putting me in that character's situation um, in a very sort of intense and meaningful way. And there are a lot of sort of universal situations that I found I could really identify with. So yeah, it probably goes in the science fiction bucket, I guess. But it's just a good book,
thank you.
period.
It's I guess it would be fair to say that it's that the science fiction part of it or fantasy part of it or crossover, however you want to put it, is more just the backdrop that enables the story to happen, and it's not really the main focus. I probably could have had a different kind of backdrop to the story theme of the story, non-science fiction, and still had a very similar story play out. Um, changing some of the elements obviously so that it made sense, but it's character focused and not like a this is a science fiction novel focused really.
Okay, I've transitioned back to um, the live stream, and I'm going to start sharing stuff and talking about stuff.
I'm excited. Are you saying anything currently?
Oh my gosh, how long have I been muted, I wonder? So anyway, the thing I was saying is, um, I've been starting to work on actual interactive demos for some of the stuff I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. I don't have a polished video that shows off all the cool stuff, but what I do have is the work in progress episode of Game Audio Pro, where I show you some of the stuff I'm working on, and also talk about some of the things we did back in the day at Pseudo Interactive to address the speaker drift issue that we encountered, quote unquote speaker drift, that I've talked about in the previous couple of videos on this channel. So what you have on screen is my Game Audio Danger Room, which is currently not really a working demo of any audio stuff, but it's the work in progress of I'm working towards that stuff. What you see in front of you is I just dropped on the floor of my demo the Dolby recommended speaker positions for a 5.1 setup. So what this kind of provides is, in Cartesian space, what are the angles of the actual things that are in one's living room if one is playing a console game on in a typical setup? So once I did that, I picked sort of some arbitrary dimensions. The grid you see is in meters. So we've got a setup where the TV is a pretty big TV. TV is bigger than a meter. The TV is this camera object down here is like where the player is sitting in the virtual space, I guess. It's also where the listener is positioned. And then we have like real-world living room stuff. And I actually grabbed from, I should have, in post, we'll drop in the link of this. I grabbed some free stuff from the Unity store so that we could actually have a 3D environment with, that's a TV table, that's TV, and didn't actually have speakers in the prefabs I was looking at, but we have these lamps will be speaker proxies. For some reason I grabbed a sofa as well. Might as well have that in there. Left rear, right rear. In post we can fast forward through all this fun stuff. If I click on the camera, can I click on the camera? We get a camera preview here. So this is it's a pretty large field of view. So it's hard to call this out. Over here on the right, under the chat, of course. Maybe we'll hide the chat for a second. Over here on the right, there's you can sort of hopefully see this on the screen. The field of view here is in degrees, and you can almost let's see if I can zoom the right direction. You can see it on screen. It renders what the camera field of view is. It's a little bit weird in 3D from the angle I have. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to see, but the if I can get my mouse on the right screen, you can see that 45 degrees to the left, 45 degrees to the right is the current field of view for the camera, And down here in the camera preview, you get an idea of, well, what does that look like when it's rendered. One of the things I talked about in the previous video is that when we're talking about where things are literally on the player's screen, the field of view in this situation, where we've got a 1.5 meter screen that's 2 meters away from the player, the field of view of how far off access of me, the listener, the edge of screen is quite narrow. So if I plunk in field of view of 15, the camera preview is a little bit low. If we go into the game with a field of view of 15, that's the field of view that maybe off by a little bit. 17. When can we see the edges of the screen? 20. These lines sort of line up with the edge of the screen now. So if I just render that again. So if I'm sitting on my couch looking at that screen from 2 meters away, these speakers are off screen, right? I can't even really see my couch. It's my rear speaker right next to me. But the thing I wanted to show is plus and minus 20 degrees, 20 degrees to the left, 20 degrees to the right, is how far things that are on screen can actually be relative to the listener. So no one has jumped in on chat to say that doesn't make sense yet, so I'm going to assume that kind of makes sense. So the problem is, it's a terrible gaming field of view because there's really no peripheral vision. What games tend to do is at least this, 45 degrees left and right. Here in the camera preview, we can see the viewer can see more left and right, basically. Maybe we can drop our chat back and see if anyone's complaining. My mom hasn't said it's stupid or unclear yet, so that's good. Toby, what was I going to talk about?
I think you were going to talk about the how you have to reposition the audio so that it syncs properly with the field of view displayed on the TV screen, because the actual field of view of the TV is plus or minus 15 to 20 degrees depending on how close you are to the thing, but the virtual field of view is higher.
Right. Yeah. So the thing that again, it's been a while since I've actually worked in the game industry with some of these libraries, but the thing that always the 3D audio APIs cared about was the Cartesian coordinates of the emitter. So you run into this situation. I wonder if I can do it in here. Oh, that's kind of off screen. 3D object cube. I just dropped a cube into the scene. Let's pretend this cube is our emitter. The cube is going to be on the ground. It's going to be 1.5 meters in front of us. And it's going to be to our left. What have I done? That's a big cube. It's also going to be smaller. That 25 meters that way. So what I wanted to show here is from the audio engine's point of view, we could have something coming at the player that is at 30 degrees, right? And this is a little bit interesting because if relative to what's on, so this, this is in game space again. It just cares about the coordinates of this emitter, right? And then it's going to calculate the angles and calculate the speaker coefficients. So what the audio engine is going to say is, oh, this is at 30 degrees to your left. And it's going to mix it basically to this speaker, which is 30 degrees to my left, right? But suddenly there's this problem because in terms of what's being rendered, where's my camera? This box is clearly on screen, right? But that speaker mapping is off screen. And I can tweak this a little bit. This is a pretty conservative field of view. I know with full auto, it was at least, the field of view was at least plus or minus 60 degrees because it was important to know when, cars were coming up on you, maybe going to pass. Wow. Okay, so Guillaume just commented in chat maybe a little while ago that plus or minus 45 is standard. And I know that full auto was larger than that. And I think honestly, players are allowed to tweak it in many cases. In
a lot of games you can adjust the field of view. Some
Yeah.
people get a little seasick if the field of view is too narrow or too wide. I think it just depends on the person.
I believe if it's too wide, it can affect graphics performance as well, because you're just rendering more things.
And I think you can get some more extreme audio distortions to either side of the screen with a really wide field of view.
For sure. You can see with the difference between 60 and 45, this little cube emitter that we plunked in is, it's closer to the center of the screen than it is to the edge of the screen, right? And meanwhile, the audio engine is still rendering it 100% speaker left, which is totally off screen. You literally hear it coming from speaker left. So this, back in the full auto days, this was bugged. Like, dude, why is that I see the car in front of me? Why does it sound like it's off screen? Tangent. If you're listening with headphones and your field of view is 60, things start being a lot more reasonable. Because, is that true? Oh no, it's still rendering it way over to the left pretty quickly. Anyway, because of where the audio engine thinks the speakers are. Rewind, delete. So, what do you do about this? Is sort of the question. Because for on-screen stuff, if the field of view is not unreasonably small, right? Where this preview down here, 20%, if the field of view is not unreasonably small for actually playing a game, you're going to have audio position distortions. Guillaume Provost. Here's the solution from Guillaume. If you want good audio, move your couch forward. So this is an interesting point. One of the things that would fix this is to a certain degree, speaker position, right? I think back, I'm switching views here a little bit to show. Sorry, I think I muted myself. One of the things you could do mathematically to quickly fix the angle of on-screen things, and as Guillaume pointed out, if you want good audio, move your couch forward. So one thing you could do is sit here, and then the speaker angle, I think that if the on-screen versus off-screen thing is still a problem, but you're as a viewer, this is much closer. Your viewer angle to the edge of the screen is much closer to where the audio is being rendered. Just because to get that peripheral vision effect, you just move your head left and right. If you have a huge computer monitor and you're playing a PC game, this is kind of the experience if you're sitting at a desk in front of a monitor. One of the things that we thought about doing was actually moving the listener here to fix a bunch of the angles. And it kind of works for things that are on the other side of this virtual plane. So if my entity that I'm modeling is over here, and it's because of my field of view, it's kind of showing up at the edge of my screen. So this is 30 degrees over here still, but it's past the screen. And me as a viewer, I can, it shows up on my screen as at the edge of the screen, and the audio is going to be 30 degrees as well, Cartesian, right, relative to this new listener. So the angles of things that are on screen in front of me start to sound pretty good if I just move the listener. So if I say my camera is here, but my listener is here, a lot of the angles are just fixed because from an audio perspective, the field of view matches this plane field of view. So the problem is that things get really messy when stuff is not on the other side of this plane on screen. For instance, that the sound source that we dropped into the 3D scene would be about here. So this starts being interesting because this is the Cartesian coordinates relative to this listener are now way off again, because this is, I don't know, 100 and something, say 110. So your audio algorithm is going to even say we don't have a rear speaker, but things are going to start getting messy with the audio algorithm, particularly if the player...
I have a question.
Sure.
Or maybe just to clarify what you're trying to explain is the issue. So with that more forward listening position, it would sound like the object is slightly behind you when in fact it's really just a bit off to your left. Is that the
yeah, because so we
disconnect?
Yeah, so the player is actually down here, right? But if we move the listener closer to the screen, the angles relative to the listener start to match up for things that are in front.
But as soon as it starts to get seriously off to your left or right, then it's the wrong position. It starts sounding like it's behind you when it should just sound like it's to your left or right.
Yeah, like if I was walking towards a bad guy, eventually the bad guy is going to be between me and the listener, right? So they're on my screen, filling up a small portion of my screen. As they approach the camera, they're actually getting quieter because the distance from the listener is increasing. That's one thing. Distance. So they're approaching the camera, but they're getting quieter because they passed the listener. And then the other thing is things that are in this. I mean, I haven't fully examined the distortion, but we lost Guillaume. Good afternoon, Guillaume.
We will miss his TLDRs.
I know. He brought up this interesting point, though, of like, yeah, I mean, one thing you could do to fix some of these things is like, not do the Dolby recommended speaker setup. move your speakers to have a field of view that matches your screen setup. So I'm going to reject this. I never explored this one too much. It seems to fix a bunch of angles in some cases, and the math is cheap, which is important, because you could have your listener be a child of your camera with just a position offset of like 2 meters to compensate for screen distance, right? And it seems like it could solve a lot of things, but we didn't drill into it too far because of other stuff. I wonder if I can quickly nuke this. So I did want to talk about what we did do and what the approach we chose to take unfortunately involved doing our own math for the speaker volumes. So we couldn't just plug in coordinates to an API and run away with our happy results. But I will show you what the math was, more or less. And let's just, if I can quickly, what field of view, where did you go? Did I close Unity? No. What field of view did we leave off with here? I think, so Guillaume was suggesting that 45 degrees is pretty standard. So let's go with...
Yeah, that's quite often the default in most video games.
Yeah. So it's plus or minus 45, so that the total field of view is 90 degrees of stuff that is visible. So let's go back to the 2D demo. So where's my notebook? So we started thinking about what's the difference between the edge of screen angle, which I'll call this EL. We'll just deal with left. So we've got the edge of screen angle, and I guess I'll draw a little theta here, and the field of view angle. So I want to try and draw 45 degrees, but pretend this is 45 degrees. And this is field of view left. And when I talk about, I should clarify that, so we're talking about an angle here, off axis from the listener position. Edge of screen left. What did I do there? Did I just nuke that? What I meant to do is this. Draw another angle. So it turned out 20 degrees is pretty much how far to the left of the literal player the edge of the screen is. So we also have field of view left, which is 45 degrees. This math is going to be a little bit annoying. Let's pretend this is 50. Let's pretend this was 15 degrees, because then we get some nice, the math is a little bit cleaner. So what we did is, for things that are on screen, we scaled the angle of an emitter by an on-screen scaler. And basically, so I'm going to leave out whether it's the left and right speak theta because of drawing limitations here. But basically, the math was, so on-screen scalar, I should probably write, well, I've said it, so I'm not going to write it out at least once. But the on-screen scalar equals edge of screen divided by field of view. And because I simplified the math, and I didn't want to be trying to draw and calculator at the same time, so we take 15 degrees divided by 45 degrees equals 0.33. So what this does is, so if we take our emitter example for where I stuck an emitter in my scene right at 30 degrees. Emitter, M. The interesting thing about this emitter is, in Cartesian space, this emitter literally is at the same angle as this speaker. So as we said before, if we just plug in these coordinates and pass it to our speaker mixer, it's going to sound off screen. It's going to sound like it's at 30 degrees. So what happens is, for every game object that's emitting sound in the game, we take the angle and scale it times, I should just put them next to each other. So what we get is, so this thing, in theory, it's at 30 degrees, and because I made the math so simple, what happens is our adjusted, what's the symbol for adjusted, Toby? Maybe we should have just put adjusted.
Gosh, I don't know.
Adjusted. We'll use variable naming. So my adjusted emitter...
You probably should have added that after I took all that math. I never used it ever again.
I strangely had a lot of call for that math that I didn't take. So our adjusted emitter angle is 10 degrees, which it seems kind of narrow. But 10 degrees from this listener on screen, so we sort of said that this edge of screen was 15 degrees. So it'd be 2/3 along, would be kind of here, is where our emitter is. And like we can sort of, if we look on camera here, this is, yeah, the 45 degree field of view. My block, I don't know why I took a white block, but I should have thrown a to-do for future demos, throw a high contrast texture on that. But, well, you can see where our speaker is, and it's basically, I would say it's 2/3 from the center, right? So this solves it. This math solves the angle problem for things that are on screen.
The point being that things that are visible on the screen should sound like they are.
Exactly, yeah.
And not like they're in a more literal position off of the screen.
Yep. The other...
I have a question,
sure.
And you might be getting to this. How does that affect things that are truly off screen? Do you have to do sort of like a reverse of what you're doing to compress it to be on the screen? And so now, like, things seem to kind of swing around behind you more rapidly because it's adjusting for the fact that more of the audio is front-loaded?
Bingo. Yep. If the thing is literally off screen, do we really want to move it toward, in an extreme measure, towards the center, right? So very good question. What do you do when the emitter angle is greater than, so emitter, we'll call it M. M2 over here is at 90 degrees, right? So if we just applied this math to it, from an audio rendering perspective, he would sound like he's coming from, so adjusted M2, would sound like he's coming from 30 degrees. So with a 2-speaker setup, who cares, right? To a certain degree. But there are other scenarios that we might want to consider. The other one, so for those of you who have been following along at home and checking out all the videos in this series, the first video I did only talked about speaker position and the fact that where the listener perceives things to be, also, of course, in addition to having to do with like where the game maps them, to a huge degree it has to do with where their physical speakers are. So, this scenario, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but what I wanted to say was it's very common now for console gamers to have rear speakers. I don't know how common. I don't know that research. Guillaume might actually know that research. But I think he popped offline. It is very common for people to have a 5.1 or more speaker setups in their gaming environment. So, mapping the stuff off screen is important and valid, because this thing that should be sounding like it's beside us still sounds like it's in front of us if we do this, if we just apply this blanket scalar.
I should point out that there's other ways to sort of fake positional audio with headphones. Like there's a distinct change in how a sound is to your ears when it's behind your ears as opposed to in front of it, like the characteristics of the sound changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they can actually fake that up to simulate something sounding like it's behind you just with 2 speakers.
Yes.
By taking advantage of how it sounds different when a real sound is actually behind you as opposed to in front of you. So it's not completely irrelevant depending on whether or not you're using that kind of audio processing to simulate 3D sound on 2 speakers.
Head-related transfer function. That's a very good point. There are a lot of different ways to do positional audio. The reason that I'm talking about this one is because this is the one that I dealt with the most as a console. As a guy, the titles I shipped were console titles. And we were basically concerned that is he us, or did I do something crazy? I did something crazy. Headphones you can get for function for to emulate multi-speaker. Uh-oh, my battery's about to run out. Okay, Toby, talk about something for 2 seconds while I forgot to plug my laptop in. Just a sec.
Okay, yeah, I'll just agree with you that it's probably more common if you're talking about console gaming that someone would either be using crappy TV speakers, which is a horrible experience, and so who cares about positional audio in that case, or they would have some sort of like 5.1 surround sound or something like that because, hey, it's on their TV and they watch movies, and so it's pretty common for a lot of people to get a fancy audio system to go with their TV. So yeah, I would imagine that on console gaming,
Hilarity.
It's more common than headphones. Maybe in part because you have to deal with a really long cable for headphones in the usual configuration of sitting several feet away from the TV on a couch. And if you're using wireless, then there's a chance of getting audio lag, which isn't fun for gaming. So, did I fill the space properly?
I have no idea.
Okay, you didn't hear, huh? All right.
What I should have done is flip to this. For those of you joining us now, esteemed author Toby Cox, filling in for technical difficulties. But oh, you don't see this. Poor Toby.
No, but I guessed from the context that you were showing
Flipped
the
to the
splash screen for my book. So
beyond the
thank you
contested zone.
for plugging that. I didn't ask him to. He just wanted to because he likes the book.
Well, yeah, Toby agreed on late notice to do this as a kind of experiment to try out the format and not have me just be a talking head doing stuff. So we were talking about, so part of this, I showed the on-screen math. As Toby pointed out, there's an off-screen component as well, and which can be particularly important with different speaker configurations. So if you've got these back speakers where that, once it's past this speaker, where is it in other speakers becomes an issue. If you're wearing, let's see if I can draw this. Apparently I cannot. If you are wearing, oh, why is my drawing becoming so finicky? I've got a weird, incredible latency with my drawing suddenly.
Low power mode because you had to swap a battery?
I don't know. Might be my computer's running too many things and starting to cook.
Oh, that could be the case. Yeah, if you're running it off a laptop, yeah, those can overheat a little more easily.
What I tried to draw over here is headphone speakers, left and right. Headphone speakers are literally at 90 degrees. So you can have, if something is right beside you in the game, you can make it sound like it's right beside you with headphones. As Toby said, there are some good algorithms that try to change the sound so that things that are behind you sound like they're behind you and stuff. They do up and down as well, which the speaker mapping angles don't really handle, unless you've got ceiling speakers and stuff. So what happens when you're off screen? I've kind of run out of room to draw a little bit, and I wonder if my drawing is going to work. What I think I might try to do is delete all this on-screen scalar stuff and see if my pen gets a little bit more responsive again. So I've got to draw some things again. Field of view, theta, and edge of screen. So basically, referring to my notes, we've got this space that goes from beyond the edge of the screen. So let's do this. From beyond the edge of the screen to straight behind the player. There is this other angle, which is off-screen angle. So off-screen equals 180 minus edge of screen angle, or we lied and said our edge of screen was 15 degrees, right?
Yes.
But it could be if this couch was back a little bit. So let's go with that. Math wizard, 165-ish. So wait, what do we do to calculate that off screen? Off screen theta equals off screen scalar. Should have spent more time with my notes.
So to start with,
Sure.
if you just kept applying the scalar that you use to have things that are literally on the screen sound like they're on screen, if you just kept applying that to things that were off screen, they'd still sound like they were off screen, but would their positions still sound accurate? Or do you have to do something different?
It depends on how many speakers you have.
Going with what you have on screen here with the
It's the
5.1.
5.1. So if so, the case I like to use is an emitter M, who's literally at 90 degrees in Cartesian space. So this is a monster or whatever who's coming up literally beside the player, saying, "Hey, I'm off screen. Come shoot me," or something. Some scintillating dialogue like that. The problem is the if we just take our on-screen scalar of 0.33, then we render the sound like it's in front of the player. And for some reason, it's not letting me draw up here. So we've rendered that sound like it's in front of the player. So
Like just off to the left off screen and not like the creepy, oh, it's right beside you kind of position, right?
yeah, and it's kind of worse than that because so the player doesn't see this thing on screen. It's appearing off screen. Actually, it's not that bad, right? If it was stereo speaker land and you only had two speakers that were in front of you, it'd be more or less okay, right? But
Right, because you can't sound any more left than the leftmost speaker in that situation.
right. But if you do have this back speaker and the sound is supposed to be coming from right beside you, there's no way of knowing this because it's off screen, right? But it's just like this whole left hemisphere has become compressed without if we just apply the on-screen scalar to everything. So this sound, which should be really right beside the player, sounds like it's coming from this 30 degrees speaker. 100%. Oh, why is my drawing not working so well? So, and the other thing you do, if the thing is literally right behind you, if there's an emitter that's literally at 180 degrees, again, if we apply our scalar, that's when that compression is like really bad, because it should be 50% rear left speaker, 50% rear right speaker, and what you're hearing is, if we're quote unquote rendering that audio at 60 degrees, what you're hearing is 100% speaker left. So that's terrible, right? The thing is supposed to be right behind you and it's 100% speaker left. That's bad. And the other thing is, if you turn your head a little bit, it's going to pop from 100% speaker left to 100% speaker right. And for some reason, my pen is just not letting me draw. But and you can sort of see my cursor down here. I have to move my screen around in order to see the bottom of the other screen. Oh my gosh, it's drawing stuff. So if one tiny degree to the left back here would with the scalar would put it at 60 degrees left, 100% speaker left, and one tiny tidge to the right would put it 100% speaker right in the two speaker system. But you know.
So effectively, there's like, maybe there technically is a right behind you, but it's such a small field that you don't really ever hear anything directly behind you with the scalar, is what you're getting at, if at all. Like, it's usually just leaping back and forth left to right instead of you ever hearing it behind you.
That's the worst fail case, right? Is that, it should be 50% left, 50% right if it's right behind me, but it's gonna end up being 60 degrees left or right. depending on
So
it being just a little bit off.
So is the solution then to do something as simple as like the inverse of what you're doing to map things on the screen, stretch out the remaining angles rather than compressing them?
Yes, correct. So we did a proportional stretch. And you know what? I think I may just close Unity because Photoshop is really complaining. And we are rendering a rendering a scene here in the background.
Screen is still rendering.
Yeah, and streaming video and stuff. Bear with me, please. Those of you who survived this far.
Let me know if you ever want help with a desktop computer.
This would do a lot better with a dedicated streaming computer, that is for sure. Lorem ipsum. Translation, Pat Clark. Of course, my screen sharing controls are right in front of my text size controls. Live. Coming at you live. Totally live. All right. So, we're going to have an off-screen scaler. Which is equal to I forget how we calculate it. So we do have okay, yeah, we have the off-screen range, right? Which is 165. And then we also have so off-screen. So sluggish. Darn it. All I want to do is show math. I wonder if it's time for Notepad. High tech.
Well, Notepad would be easier than chicken scratches.
Right? Look at that. High tech. Real-time problem solving. Okay. Problem creation. You're kidding me. OneNote. I mean, Notepad. We'll cut this in the produced version. Okay. So.
So if we're talking about computing it for half of a circle, 180 degrees, you've got 165 degrees of stuff that you should be able to hear but not see. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then that has to fill how many degrees? Because the TV is occupying 15 degrees.
Yeah. So sorry, I did that.
But it's actually representing that 15 degrees is actually representing a larger amount.
Right.
Right.
So
it's representing 45.
Yeah.
So yeah, so 180 minus 45 then. So you've got 145 degrees of direction that have to be remapped to what's not visible.
Agreed.
Which is, so you've got 145 degrees that has to be remapped to a more realistic 180 minus 15, 165, right?
Yes. So I'm going to fill in the steps here. So Toby is ahead of me by a couple steps. We have we have 165 degrees left and right that are off screen. Like physically off screen in terms of relative to the listener and the screen. Once it moves past those 15 degrees, you're into past the edge of the TV. But the off-screen field of view is what did we do? Set our field of view at 45. So
Yeah, 45.
So 135 or 180 minus 45 degrees. So 135. I'm skipping steps here. Do. Okay, so we have off-screen field of view where I'm forgetting what the math we did was. But basically, I think since we're expanding things, we have a scalar.
Right, and so wouldn't you have to divide 165 by 135? And that would give you the multiplier for filling in the uncompressing, if you will, the area.
All right, let's calculate that.
I did that. It's 1 2/9 or 1.22 if you round off.
Let's do that. Okay, so the other thing you want to do is we want to start this at the edge of the screen. So if my emitter is at 45 degrees, the emitter should sound like it's coming from the side of the screen, right?
Right, like just off the edge, right?
Yeah. So my off-screen, let's call it angle, or off-screen M, adjusted off-screen, or adjusted M, adjusted off-screen M equals M plus, no, what is it? M minus it's 45 plus M times M minus 45 times off-screen scalar. Could that be right? Let's try it for M equals 45 degrees. So if M is where my mouse is, why does this not let me draw? Come on, Photoshop, don't let me down. If I have an emitter, oh no, I got this wrong. I got this backwards, I think. I think we want it to be at we want it to emit at 50 degrees plus, right? Yeah, I have it backwards.
If you want to make sure that the thing is definitely off screen, then you probably want to.
Yeah, this is off because I sort of have this backwards. So yeah. m minus 45.
Note to self, do math in advance of live stream.
Right? I had it on my notebook. But then I'm like, I'm just trying to look in too many places at once. Okay, so if m is, say m is at 40, say where this lorem ipsum is. Say if m is at 45 degrees, m is at the edge of the screen. So depending on how we do our game logic for this calculation, either this is going to be using the on-screen scalar, and we'll just get 15 degrees back. Or if we've decided, depending on how we do the edge case, if we decided this is off-screen, we get, so m minus 45 comes to 0, times the scalar also comes to 0, plus 15. It still plays here at the edge of the screen. If it is 40, if m is at 46 degrees, then we get, our scalar starts to come in. So we get 1.22 plus 15 degrees, and then m starts to play here. So instead of the audio playing at 16 degrees, it's 16.22 degrees, which is not huge.
Yeah, it wouldn't be anything that you'd be like, oh, that's wrong. That's way too off to the left.
Yeah. So let's try it for 90 degrees, which 90 degrees is interesting. So for 90, if we plug in 90 degrees, we get, what is, should I show the math? So it's 15.
Sure, show the math.
15 plus 90 minus 45 times 1.22. So what is 45 times 1.22? I think we might have...
54.9. We might have done something wrong somewhere in there.
No, that sounds about right. Because we're going to add in the 15 again, right? So 15 plus 54.9 equals
69.9. So 70 degrees.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's starting to be compensated, right? And I think what happens is, so this is 90 degrees, adjusted equals 70. That's not terrible. So things, if a thing is circling around you, it moves faster off screen than it does on screen, sound-wise. What are you going to do? Your screen is so wide, right? If your field of view is 180 degrees, of course it's going to take half the time to traverse that 180 degrees, and then it's got to catch up. So just plugging in the math here for my sanity. 15 plus 180 minus 1. What is 135 times 1.22? I think we did this math earlier, and it's just 180, right? No, it's not. Calculator?
It's 165 if you round up.
Perfect. So basically it catches up by the time it's behind you. 15. Oh, I should put a plus sign in here. By the time it gets behind you, it's caught up. The thing that did not occur to me until I was preparing for this demo. So by the way, people, this is basically the math that we did in full auto. I deleted the on-screen scalar calculation. But so the math is not bad in terms of there are no divides. You know, you figure out sort of how wide your screen is and how close the player is sitting once, and you have E, and you can calculate your scalar for the on-screen scalar. There's one divide, and you have your field of view. You know, field of view is sort of changed only occasionally. So there's one when the field of view is set, or whenever you have the default field of view, there's one divide to calculate the field of this. Anyway, there are two divides to determine your scalars that don't need to happen at runtime, right? And then you just have a multiply for all your emitters, which is it on screen, is it off screen, based on the angle, and then there's a multiply. So asterisk, this is something that your game engine now has to do. Is, you know, if you have, there's not a lot of work to do 3D sound if you're just plugging emitter positions and listener positions into an API that takes those things. You don't have to think about these things at all. If you're applying these scalars via game math, suddenly you have to do things. You have to take your angle and first of all, you need to know the emitter angle, which if you're just passing positions to an audio API, you never had to worry about. But now you need the angle of the thing relative to the player object, or sorry, I should say the listener object, right? So if you didn't have that before, there's a calculation for you. I kind of feel like in general people have that. I mean, again, so much stuff these days is just, throw objects to graphics hardware even. The game logic step or audio logic step doesn't necessarily have visibility is maybe not the visibility is maybe not the right word. Your audio engine doesn't necessarily have the angles and the distance for all the emitters. And now it has to. But this is what we did. This is what we did for full auto. We calculated our own matrix coefficients, and we had our own distance algorithm.
You could probably refine it a little bit more by having like maybe two coefficients for off-screen stuff. One that handles just off the screen to immediately to your left or right, and then another one that handles behind you. If you wanted it to be like something at 90 degrees should literally sound like it's at 90 degrees when it's off screen, you could probably have two different coefficients to handle that.
Yeah,
I don't know
I like that a lot.
How well that would sound, but
I think it would sound better than this, because 90 degrees would sound like 90 degrees, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, because depending on the kind of game you're playing, it would matter more or less. Like if you're playing, for example, a survival horror game where you are trying to creep the listener, the player out, if you want something to sound like it's right beside them, it needs to sound like it's right beside them, or you lose a little bit of that creep factor. You don't want to make it sound like it's just a bit to your left, right?
Yeah, there are things that we didn't play with in full auto. And again, full auto was a combat racing car game, right?
Yeah, and
things are not sneaking up to your left in a dark room, right?
Yeah, you're constantly turning anyway, so just as long as it's like I need to turn a certain amount to my left or to my right if I want to see this thing, that's good enough. Like it's close enough for something like that that's fast-paced anyway, where things audibly might seem to be whipping around anyway and constantly changing position.
Yeah. Um, it's when we did this, it solved the field of view issue. Um, and I don't want to get into it in this session, although we could, when we could just keep rolling and talk about numbers. Um, I will just,
Numbers aren't sexy.
numbers are so sexy. I'll say, this isn't the only set of scalars we had in full auto. So once we committed to, you know what, we're going to calculate, we're going to have our own, we're going to have our own distance algorithm for, you know, proximity and fall off. And we're going to calculate our own speaker matrix coefficients. I think that's what they're called. Anyway, we're going to calculate our levels for 5.1. If we're doing our own panning already, we can also throw in scalars for the speaker position. So we did it very simply. I mean, these days, I'm not a huge gamer. I think I played, like, this calendar year, I played 3 or 4 titles on my console. At least 2 of the, so one was a PC title, but anyway, of the console titles I played, at least 2 of them had, like, screen calibration set up when you first launched the game. And it was like, you know, even if it's just adjust the contrast, or like they had sliders for, you know, when is this logo barely visible? And when is, I forget what they had, but like they wanted you to be able to, if you're playing in a dark scene in the game, still be able to see the important stuff, and have good contrast levels that matched what their game art people, I guess, thought the game should look like, right? So you can tweak the contrast, you can tweak the brightness in game with this calibration screen. That's not optional, basically. It's like, I launch the game for the first time, I calibrate my screen. As a Game Audio X Pro evangelist guy, I would love to have seen, okay, your screens are good. What's your listening environment look like? Where they have something like this screen, and they can literally move the sitting position, the speakers, and the screen so that it matches what their speaker setup is and what their listening environment is. And then, so what we did in full auto, we didn't have it. I don't think we had it as, hey, you're playing the game for the first time, you must do your audio setup. But we had audio settings, at least for full auto 2, where you could pick between, am I listening on headphones? Am I listening with a wide speaker configuration relative to my screen? Or are my speakers narrow relative to my screen? Because, you know, the math kind of changes if the panning totally changes depending on where the speakers are, right? If I've got headphones on and my speaker is 90 degrees to my left, and I want to emulate a sound that's 45 degrees, the mix is much different than if my speakers are in front of me. So, that being said, we had other scalars, depending on the number of speakers that the user had, how wide the speakers were, and whether or not there were headphones. Headphones is the biggest one, because there's a huge difference between a speaker at 30 degrees and a speaker at 90 degrees in terms of where the sound is perceived in the mix. And I had a whole video about that back in episode 1.
Question now. At least in my mind, I've been imagining a game that is first-person camera, like it's trying to pretend like it's seeing out of your eyes.
Yes.
Is this changed at all if we have a third-person camera where you can see yourself and you're like looking over your shoulder while you're playing, like say in The Witcher?
Yeah. Um,
Does that change the way positional audio is computed? Does it try to do it? Because I'm thinking about it and I can't really remember. Would it be trying to do it relative to the person you can see on the screen, or still to you as the passive observer?
it's almost always done relative to the the listener object is almost always sort of in the camera. So it's us, the floating head, floating along behind the Witcher, is the listener object.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Because I could kind of see them going both ways, where it's like you're seeing yourself on the screen because it's a third person camera. So something should sound positionally, maybe technically, like it's off to the left of the character on the screen and not necessarily where you are in the room. I'm not sure how, if that would throw someone's perception of the sound off, or if they would be able to get in the right frame of mind where they would understand that. So I was just curious if
the,
that actually changed anything.
yeah, again, I would say like almost 100% of the time, people are putting the listener at the camera. Things start getting a little bit weird if so when things that are on screen, the whole root of this problem is things that are on screen not matching, like having audio for the game not matching what people see on screen. Um, and so because you would end up with weird situations where, I wish I could bring Witcher up. It's a little gameplay video of Witcher, but you would have weird situations where like things would definitely be in front of you, viewer wise, but behind your avatar. Particularly if you move the camera back a fair bit, which is an option. So then it's I mean it could be an artistic choice, but it's like perception wise it doesn't make a ton of sense. A rat scurries across the screen between you and the Witcher. To have it sound like it's behind you, to me doesn't make sense. Um, the other thing is, I think I mean you can pan the camera around a fair bit, I believe, in most third person games to sort of look left and right. Um, and again, relative to sort of where you're looking on screen, positions of emitters are changing, right? But they wouldn't be changing relative to your avatar. It's just a bit weird, you know. Things again could be if you can. I think you can pan the camera all the way around and look at your character from the front, and then left and right would be switched, right?
Would be inverted, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to throw a monkey wrench into your explanation. I was just curious if there was a simple answer to that question. I think you did get to it, which is probably just keep it relative to where the player would be sitting in their room and not relative to the avatar that they can see that's supposed to be representing themselves on the screen.
But I mean, I like the questions that you're asking because the answers to these are um, that like there isn't a right answer in many ways to this stuff, and there are more listening contexts than the one I'm most used to. Because professionally, I had to deal with this in the context of console games, right? But and the market is now for video games like 2D kind of isometric on your phone games are a huge percent of like global video game revenue now, right?
I can't tell you how sad that makes me, by the way.
But I mean, they're not competing for the same market space, I would say.
Well, I don't. Let me just clarify. I don't have anything against cell phone games or mobile gaming in and of itself. I'm not saying like the only proper way to play a game is on a desktop computer. Oh my God, you heathen. I'm just saying that like the monetization is insane.
Yeah.
Like even compared to it, I know it's crept into, regular, computer video games as well, but in the mobile space, the monetization is insane and it's insidious and it ruins games for me to know that you cannot experience the fullness of the game unless you're constantly throwing money at these little one-off expenses that they keep trying to chip away at you for. I would much rather have and earlier on in the mobile gaming market, it was more like this. I'd much rather have I gave you money, give me the game, and not, oh, I get to play the game for quote unquote free. Oh, I want more turns. I have to give you $20 for more turns today. Like, I don't, that's what I don't like.
I hear you. Yeah, that is a whole thread. But yeah, I mean, my my main perspective in terms of game audio design has been um, sim games, where there's a 3D model of an environment that the player's act is. It's like I'm in the game, or my avatar is in a virtual world, and so that's what's being modeled. But there's obviously like
It's
platformers.
something like Diablo 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small part of gaming. It's the part that I really enjoy. The thing I really like as well is when there's it's kind of a cinematic drama. Um, so it's the audio's design and aesthetic is sort of action filmy if it's an action game or a shooter game. Um, One of my other passions, of course, is adaptive music, or as they call it, interactive video game music. Um, and I like the idea of, can a score follow the action the way a film score would follow the action for this scene? People are people are really used to having a score provide emotional context for their entertainment, and I'd love to bring that sort of thing into the video game. One of the things as well, mentioning film. So we've got this 5.1 system we inherited from DVDs and home theater, right? And that it wasn't really designed to, it wasn't designed originally for simulating 3D Cartesian space, right? That was sort of, it was convenient that it's there in the living rooms when consoles started to take over, especially like the HD TVs started to happen, and people were plugging into receivers and setting up these speakers and stuff like that. It's great that we have the opportunity to mix into these speakers, but a lot of the craft for mixing for 5.1, wasn't focused on off-screen stuff. Because in film, usually you're concerned with on-screen stuff. Like in video games, you can end up with off-screen speakers a lot, unless you're paying attention and doing logic for that sort of thing. In film and television, you don't almost ever have off-screen speakers, right? I'm talking about literal people speaking.
The only time I really
people
notice
speaking,
like
not
off-screen audio. Yeah. The only time in a movie that I really notice off-screen audio is if it's like as an example, like an action movie where there's a car that's like coming up from behind you and it hits a jump and it basically jumps over the viewer and then appears on screen landing or something, and then you hear the rear speakers and then the side speakers to simulate it being over you, and then the front speakers for it landing on screen, right? But most movies, I really only notice left, right, center. I don't really get a lot of sense of behind me or, directly to my left or whatever.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, right? The job of the film audio team is usually like match the visual, right? Enhance the visual, sell the visual. There's not a lot of like, oh, it must sound like this thing is happening in this proximity, right? So that's something. Yeah, we're going off on a tangent a little bit too, but there really are two elements to how you're going to handle positional audio and mix and stuff like that. And part of it is, well, can we physically model these emitters, right, in a realistic way to the end user. And the other part of the question is like the creative part of like if it's off screen and it's how important is it actually to even play at all, sort of stuff, and game logic about like if do I wait for this NPC to be in the field of view before I allow this NPC's audio to be triggered, kind of stuff. Anyway, but what this whole thing launched, I think, from Toby saying, for the off-screen scaler, maybe that makes the most sense up to 90 degrees, right? And then having a different or zero scaler for things that are from 90 degrees to 180 degrees. And I actually agree. When I was looking at this math again, more than like almost 15 years since Full Auto 1. Anyway, it's been a while since the original math. But
would it be fair to say that was like a quick fix, like to solve a problem on short notice, and like maybe it worked well enough for that particular game that it didn't matter that it wasn't like as full a solution as it could have been?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't drill into it super far. I mean, I don't want to say we weren't paying attention to details, but I think this thing here that we looked at, the case of when the sound is beside you and the adjusted value is, well, it's not quite beside you. Like in testing, it was not. It wasn't a big deal, right? But sort of thinking about it later, I kind of wish that 90 was 90 for the headphone users, right? For the headphone users.
Right, if nothing else.
Yeah, because if you're in the headphones, as soon as it goes past this 90 degrees, it would start panning back, right? Which actually kind of makes sense. All right, I think we've chatted for like an hour and a half. That's like feature length comedy size of video. Did we want to say anything else before we jumped off of this?
Not unless you had anything in mind. Maybe what you intend to cover next time, if you have a plan.
Good question. Well, what would you like me to cover next time?
Well, I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know where you intend to go with this series. I just know what you've like covered so far. Like, what is your, maybe in a more generic sense, what are you planning to cover throughout the rest of this?
I don't even know. I mean, I would kind of like to do a couple videos a month. And I just flashed up your your book flash screen again. Thanks to close things off. My co-host's book. I'd kind of like to do a couple videos a month. I don't know. I've gone pretty in depth into this issue for many videos. I could I could throw together something for the math for compensating for speaker position, because we showed the math for field of view compensation, but not speakers moving around. The thing that I kind of like to build is that interface for, what I'd like to see at the beginning of video games a little bit is, okay, here's your, what layout matches your setup most closely. Pick that, and then okay, here's a sound rotating around you, right? Poke the button when it's at the left of your, when it sounds like it matches the left of your screen, kind of stuff.
Yeah, so rather than you having to like manually tweak stuff like speaker positions until it's like dead on, it's just like, okay, I know roughly where your speakers are supposed to be. I know what kind of a simulation to throw at you. You just tell me when it sounds straight to your left. You just tell me when it sounds like it's straight in front or behind, because sometimes depending on the room's geometry, I've seen some people put speakers in some kind of weird off-center positions, but if you calibrate it right, then it still sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, my little 3D demo that I that I was showing off earlier too. Like I want to show some of these solutions, um, if I can get into the code properly, right? Um, as actual live demos, right? Rather than chicken scratch on Photoshop. But there's other stuff I want to talk about, like the things we ran into simulating engine sounds in full auto, things with reverb emulation stuff, um, looking at certain games and what they've done with interactive music. I don't know. I don't even know. So many things to talk about.
I would be interested in hearing some sort of a challenge related to interactive music.
Oh boy.
Like, for example, say a situation gradually becoming more tense in representing that in a score without actually changing the music outright, like to a different, song or whatever, or something like how to handle, say, a zone change where the background music is supposed to change to reflect the different visuals in a zone or something like that. If you're in like sort of an open world game where the biome changes and you want a different background music or sound effects associated with that biome.
Sounds
That would
good.
be if you could cover that, if you felt that was sort of within the purview of what you wanted to cover. I think I would find that very interesting.
Cool. Um, okay. I am. So what I might do next time, a couple weeks from now, is switch gears a little bit and do a quick demo of Mr. Pointy. Do you remember Mr. Pointy?
Vaguely, I don't think I fully remember what that was.
It was a little 2D action game that I built in Flash that actually demonstrates the way we approached the music score in full auto. So it's kind of interesting. It answers kind of one of your questions, but it would be fun. I think it would be fun for me to drag that out or yeah, not drag that out. we don't want sessions that drag out. Dig that up